The most famous mystery in Warhammer 40,000 was almost solved in 1999. Not in the story, in real life. Before the Lost Primarchs became the great unanswerable question of the setting, before Games Workshop's own authors were posting on Reddit that there is not allowed to be an answer, the company's fiction imprint put into print a character that the community has spent 2 decades treating as a glimpse behind the curtain. A name used, a designation applied that shouldn't have been, a door left visibly ajar, and then, in a later printing, that word appears to have been quietly changed, from a title that implied something to a title that didn't, without acknowledgment, without errata, without a single public word of explanation. This isn't a theory video about what happened to the Lost Primarchs inside the fiction. 2 creators working independently have already mapped the edges of that territory, and together cleared 120,000 views doing it. Inquisitor Romanov's The Lost Primarch, Games Workshop Retconned in 1999, sits at nearly 66,000 views. Codex Unknown's RUBINEK, The Lost Primarchs that got retconned, sits at 54,000. Same story, 2 separate investigations, same evidentiary gap. The demand is documented, but neither video fully draws the conclusion that the act of erasure itself, the real-world publishing decision, the changed word, the decades of enforced silence, is more revealing than any in-universe answer could be. That choosing permanent absence and maintaining it across 35 years of publishing tells you more about the mystery than the mystery tells you about anything else. To understand why, start with the blank itself. Warhammer 40,000 launches in 1987. Rick Priestley, the game's primary designer, builds the setting around 20 Space Marine legions led by 20 demigod sons of the Emperor, scattered across the galaxy as infants by the forces of chaos, recovered one by one during the Great Crusade. 18 get names, histories, faces. The 20th is Alfarius, last to be found, famously late. But scroll down any list of those 20 legions and you hit 2 gaps, 2 and 11. No names, no homeworlds, records marked expunged or deleted, just blank numerals sitting in a list. The Lexicanum Wiki, one of the hobby's most meticulously sourced reference databases, opens its article on the subject with this line: "Precious little is known about 2 of the 20 Space Marine legions, numbered 2 and 11, and their respective Primarchs, as their records are simply noted as having been expunged or destroyed in imperial listings." Early editions, Codex Imperialis, the 2nd edition Ultramarines Codex, went further, stating records were deleted following the heresy. Later material softened even that, shifting to simply expunged without the timing reference. A small wording change, unremarked upon, that moved the erasure from a datable event to an eternal condition. The blank numerals were never removed from the list. The language around them just grew quieter. Priestley's own intent, documented in later retrospective community interviews, though no primary 1980s design document has surfaced publicly, was a deliberate choice about player space. The Daka community summarizes it consistently. The actual doylist reason is that Rick Priestley wanted to create a sense of mystery and awe in the setting. The Lost Legions were blank slots, 2 open lineages, room for players to invent their own Primarchs and chapter lineages in an era when the Horus Heresy was meant to stay semi-mythological, never fully mapped. Priestley wasn't hiding a developed answer. He was protecting a creative vacancy, 2 open slots that players could inhabit without colliding with established canon. That founding intent matters because the question here isn't, what did Priestley suppress? He suppressed nothing. The question is what happened to the blank after he handed the setting over to a decade's worth of codex writers, fiction authors, and eventually an entire novel imprint that would spend 15 years deciding what not to write about the 2nd and the 11th. The answer begins in 1999 with a short story called Hell in a Bottle by Simon Jowett. Some context. By 1999, Black Library, Games Workshop's fiction imprint, had existed for only a few years. Into the Maelstrom was one of the first wave of Black Library anthologies, collections of short fiction from multiple authors, published in an era when the setting's editorial infrastructure was still being built. The Horus Heresy novel series wouldn't begin for another 7 years, with Dan Abnett's Horus Rising in 2006. The detailed, consistently managed continuity that would eventually require an internal editorial team to maintain simply didn't exist in 1999. Authors writing Black Library fiction in that era worked from codex background, personal knowledge of the setting, and a degree of latitude that later tightened considerably. The kind of detail that would eventually require careful cross-referencing could, in 1999, slip through without triggering a correction until someone noticed, if anyone did. According to the secondary sources, primarily Romanov's video, the most detailed community investigation of this specific story, Hell in a Bottle features a character named Rubin leading a force called the Iron Hearts in combat against Chaos Space Marines in the setting's far future timeline. In at least one version of that story, that character holds the title Primarch, and the Iron Hearts are called a Legion. In at least one version. That qualifier is the entire evidentiary problem, and the video's credibility depends on being precise about it. What Romanov confirmed finding is the Chapter Master version, a printing in which Rubin is titled Chapter Master, and the Iron Hearts are called a chapter. That is the verified existing state of the text. The earlier Primarch version exists in community memory and wiki documentation, but hasn't been confirmed through a primary scan of the original Into the Maelstrom printing. Romanov, in his own video, explicitly states he was unable to verify the original wording either way. The physical inaccessibility of that original text is part of the evidentiary problem. Into the Maelstrom was published in 1999, in an era before the systematic digital preservation of out-of-print hobby materials. Physical copies of the anthology exist, but they circulate in used book markets and private collections rather than accessible archives, and comparing specific lines between a 1999 first printing and a later reprint requires the kind of dedicated physical archival effort that the community's researchers generally haven't been able to document publicly. The result is a story that circulates as established community history, while resting on community memory and secondary investigation rather than a produced primary source. There's a further complication. Romanov's transcript uses the name Rubin. Every fan wiki, the Warhammer 40k fandom Iron Hearts article, forum threads on Bolter and Chainsword, multiple Reddit discussions, uses RUBINEK. That's also the name in Codex Unknown's title, RUBINEK, the Lost Primarchs that got retconned. The discrepancy is unresolved. Phonetic variation between a transcription and a printed name, different printing runs, or a different edition altogether could account for it, but no confirmed primary GW text has established either spelling as authoritative. The fandom wiki's Iron Hearts article states plainly that in the original printing, the Iron Hearts were led by Primarch RUBINEK and were called a Legion, and that author Simon Jowett later admitted using Primarch was a mistake.
Romanov investigated that claimed admission directly and found nothing.
In his own framing, he labeled it legend in folklore. He couldn't locate any interview, forum post, convention panel recording, or social media statement by Jowett on this subject. The admission circulates as established fact in the community while remaining unverifiable to the investigator who looked hardest for it. So, here is what the evidence actually shows, stated precisely. Confirmed. Hell in a Bottle by Simon Jowett was published in 1999 in the Black Library anthology Into the Maelstrom. A character associated with a force called the Iron Hearts appears in the story. A version of this text exists, found by Romanov, in which this character holds the title Chapter Master, and the force is called a chapter. Reported by multiple community sources without a confirmed primary scan. An earlier version used Primarch and Iron Heart's Legion instead, implying a connection to the Lost Legions. Reported and explicitly flagged as unverifiable by the community's own primary investigator. A subsequent reprint in a later anthology called Let the Galaxy Burn restored the original Primarch Legion wording, and Simon Jowett ever commented on the change in any direction. Both Romanov and Codex Unknown independently built video investigations around this story. Together they cleared 120,000 views. That's a meaningful social fact. The community has accepted the broad outline as credible reconstruction, even without a primary scan. But credible reconstruction and verified historical record are different things, and the script should be clear about which it's working with, because the actual argument doesn't require the Primarch version proven. It requires something more specific. It requires an accounting for GW's silence. A chapter master version of the text exists. The community, having examined it, believes it represents a changed version of an earlier publication that said Primarch. Games Workshop has said nothing about this for 25 years. No errata. No Black Library editorial note. No Warhammer community post. No statement from the author. In 25 years of increasingly detailed community scrutiny, there are two ways to be institutionally silent about something, and they produce different results. If Primarch RUBINEK was a clerical error by a fiction author in 1999, Jowett using a loaded canonical term without fully understanding its implications, and if a later editor caught it and corrected it as routine cleanup, the normal response to 2 decades of community discussion would be, the author says it was a mistake. It's been corrected. The Iron Hearts are a chapter. That response would end the thread. The silence doesn't end the thread. It feeds it instead. The alternative is that someone, at some point, made a deliberate decision about that word and then made no public comment about either the word or the decision, and that every subsequent Black Library author, writing across 65 Horus Heresy novels, maintained their own version of the same posture. The 2 and 11 exist on the list, their records are expunged, and nobody names them. Under the inertia theory, that GW has no answer, the blank was never developed, and the never-to-be-revealed language is a post hoc rationalization of a creative gap. None of this required active management. Inertia leaves things alone. It doesn't edit printings of mid-list anthologies silently, years after publication. The changed text is an act, even if we can't fully confirm what it changed from. And Aaron Dembski-Bowden's 2018 Reddit comment isn't the grammar of inertia. Not allowed to be an answer describes an active prohibition. Something is preventing the answer from existing, and Dembski-Bowden, one of Black Library's most senior authors, knows about it.
That prohibition's hardening into something approaching editorial policy is traceable through the public record, even if no formal GW document codifying it has ever been released. In 2018, Dembski-Bowden engaged with a Reddit discussion about fan theories that the Space Wolves had destroyed the Lost Legions. As reported by the games journalism site Wargamer, his objection was framed not in terms of lore inconsistency, but in terms of what an answer would be. The Space Wolves destroying the Lost Legions would be an answer. And there's not allowed to be an answer. Passive, prohibitive construction. Not, we haven't decided yet. Not, there isn't a plan. The phrase is, not allowed. Something is prohibiting the answer from existing, and Dembski-Bowden, writing the Night Lords trilogy and multiple Horus Heresy entries across 15 years inside Black Library's editorial processes, is aware of the constraint. A community summary of a mini wargaming interview with Gav Thorpe, another long-serving Black Library author, points the same direction. Thorpe's position, as summarized by a Reddit poster, is that the Lost Primarchs will never be revealed because ultimately GW never thought of answers to it, and never will. The mystery is the point. Community summary, not verified verbatim transcript. But the alignment between Thorpe's reported position, Dembski-Bowden's direct comment, and Priestley's original design philosophy is consistent enough across sources, decades, and authors that it reads as shared editorial culture rather than individual opinion. The 65-book Horus Heresy series is the most sustained evidence. From 2006 through the final volumes, the series covered 18 known legions with extraordinary depth. Homeworlds named, battles documented, secondary characters developed across multiple entries, Primarch deaths written at full narrative scale. Not one of those 65 books assigned a name, an identity, or a homeworld to the Primarchs of Legion 2 or Legion 11. Characters speak around them. The brothers we no longer speak of, those whose records were expunged, the grief for 2. Nobody names them, in 65 books. The sustained absence at that scale isn't accidental, and the sustained absence continues to be actively managed. The 9th edition Adeptus Custodes Codex contains a reference to something called Subject 11, cryptic enough to be read as a tease toward the 11th Legion without confirming anything. A timeline in more recent Horus Heresy material places the discovery of the 11th Primarch in 927 Bot M30, 5 years after Corax was found, a change from earlier lore that had the Lost Primarchs gone before Corax arrived. A small retcon, but whoever made it knew it contradicted established text and chose to make it anyway, which implies a reason for the new timeline to matter later. GW isn't just maintaining the blank, it's continuing to build architecture around it. That's a different relationship to the absence than inertia. The value of maintaining that absence comes down to what the blank actually does. Priestley's 1987 design rationale was practical. Blank slots for player homebrew. 2 open Primarch lineages meant 2 creative sandboxes, 2 opportunities for the hobby to expand through player imagination rather than GW-defined canon. The mystery wasn't an engagement strategy in 1987. It was a design gap that worked better empty than filled, because filling it would remove player freedom. Somewhere in the decades between 1987 and now, the gap became load-bearing in a different way. The YouTube numbers are the clearest proof available. A video cataloging every canonical reference to the 2nd and 11th Legions across GW's entire publication history cleared 231,000 views. Romanov's video about GW teasing the Lost Primarchs sits at 89,000. His 1999 Retconned investigation sits at nearly 66,000. Codex Unknown's parallel investigation hit 54,000.
4 videos, 2 channels, 1 topic. The same absence, generating sustained multi-creator engagement across years. Meanwhile, the smaller seed video, Games Workshop erased 2 Primarchs on purpose, sits at 364 views, which demonstrates something meaningful. Planting a question and developing it into a documented story are different things, and the development is where the engagement lives. These videos generate views precisely because they can't close the question. Neither Romanov's nor Codex Unknown's investigation solves anything. Both are compelling specifically because the story they're telling is unresolved. The chapter master text exists. The Primarch text can't be confirmed from a primary scan. GW never explained the difference. And the gap between what the community believes and what can be documented is itself interesting. Now trace what happens the moment GW assigns a canonical name to the Primarch of the Second Legion. The 231,000 view every reference video becomes a historical archive rather than an ongoing project. Every homebrew chapter built around a Lost Legion lineage either gains canonical legitimacy or loses it, with no middle ground. The 9th edition Subject 11 reference becomes confirmation or irrelevance, a mystery that currently supports infinite parallel interpretations. Across decades of forum threads, army lists, YouTube investigations, and homebrew lore documents, becomes a settled question with a correct answer and a wrong one. A Primarch with an actual name becomes a character with defined virtues and failings and a specific story. The two without names are pure potential, vast enough to hold whatever the reader brings. Answered questions generate a brief engagement spike and go quiet. Permanent mysteries generate slow, compound, sustainable engagement. From the standpoint of a company whose business model returns fans to the setting repeatedly across editions and media formats and product lines, a question that can't be fully answered is a renewable asset. An answered question is a closed account. A Quora answer summarizing the community's received understanding of GW's design rationale captures the consumer-side logic. The reason for Games Workshop never revealing the identities of the Forgotten and the Purged is to allow players to design their own legion when playing Horus Heresy. That's Priestley's 1987 logic, still being articulated 30 years later, still accurate enough to repeat, which means the blank has held its original function across 3.5 decades of setting expansion, a 20-year novel series, and multiple edition overhauls. That's not inertia, that's maintenance. Inside the fiction, the erasure has a name. The imperial practice of destroying all records, icons, and monuments pertaining to a condemned figure is called the Edict of Obliteration. In High Gothic, the Damnatio Memoriae, condemnation of memory. The Warhammer 40K fandom wiki describes the complete erasure of Legions 2 and 11 as the most successful edict of obliteration ever carried out in Imperial history. The record doesn't lose something. It gains a clean blank. The fiction provides remarkable texture for what maintaining that blank costs and what it looks like from the inside. In The Lightning Tower by Dan Abnett, Rogel Dorn walks through the falls of the Cath Mandau precinct in the Imperial Palace, past pillars bearing life-size statues of the Primarchs, and notes, the 2nd and 11th plinths had been vacant for a long time. No one ever spoke of those two absent brothers. Their separate tragedies had seemed like aberrations. Had they, in fact, been warnings that no one had heeded? Separate tragedies, Dorn says. Two distinct events, not one. Aberrations that turned out to be warnings for something Dorn can't specify clearly enough to name. In 1,000 Suns by Graham McNeil, Magnus the Red begins a sentence at the triumph of Ulanor. A great day, is it not? 9 sons of the Emperor gathered together on one world. Such a thing hasn't happened since... And Mortarion cuts him off. I know well when it was. and the Emperor forbade us to speak of it again. Do you disobey that command? The prohibition runs between Primarchs in private conversation, when no one is watching. In Vulcan Lives by Nick Kime, Vulcan tells his first captain, "None of us wants another sanction, another empty pillar in the great investiary, another brother's name excised from all record. It's shame enough to bear the grief for two." The grief is confirmed, the names stay unspoken. In Fear to Tread by James Swallow, Sanguinius articulates the specific terror. "I won't be responsible for the erasure of the blood angels from imperial history. I won't have a third empty plinth beneath the roof of the hegemon as my legion's only memorial." Not afraid of punishment, afraid of that particular kind of punishment, the kind that leaves no trace except the number in a list. In Deliverance Lost by Gav Thorpe, the Emperor tells the newly found Corax he has 17 brothers. Corax, confused, he is the 19th, asks how this is possible. The Emperor's face goes bleak, filled with deep sorrow. His answer, "The other two. That is a conversation for another day." In 65 Horus Heresy novels, that day never arrived. The Forge World book Horus Heresy Book 1, Betrayal, written by Alan Bly, takes a different approach. Its table listing all 20 legions has the names for Sue and 11 blacked out, redaction bars, not empty cells. Bly chose to show the shape of the absent text rather than leave the field blank. The length of the Sioux Legion's redacted name bar approximates Emperor's Children. The Sioux Primarch's name bar is approximately as long as Alfarius, a single name. The 11 Primarchs bar matches roughly Magnus the Red, 2 words or one with a title. The text beneath the redaction bars has measurable dimensions. The shape of the thing is present in the act of hiding it. The most complete rendering of the mechanism at work comes from the short story The Chamber at the End of Memory. Malcador the Sigillite confronts Rogel Dorn, a being with perfect eidetic recall, capable of accessing every moment of his life with the clarity of a printed page, and asks him to name the Lost Primarchs. A bolter and chainsword thread reproduces the exchange from the text. Their names were, his mighty voice faltered, his brow creased in frustration. He could only see the phantoms of those moments. Holding on to them was like trying to capture smoke between his fingers. To his horror, Dorn realized that he didn't know. The awareness was there. He could almost see the shape of the knowledge out on the far horizon of his thoughts, but it retreated from his every effort to see it clearly. Dorn then understands what was done to him. "Something has been done to me. You shrouded my memories. You invaded my mind." Malcador's response, "Not just yours, Gilliman's, and the others who met them." The memories weren't destroyed. They were made inaccessible. Later, Malcador describes the process. "It's extremely difficult to extract a reminiscence, even in an ordinary human. In a brain as complex and perfectly engineered as that of a Primarch, the task becomes Herculean. Imagine a tree in the earth, rising from a web of roots. How would one remove that without disturbing a single atom of the soil? Memory can't be cut and patched like a mnemonic spool. It exists as a holographic thing in multiple dimensions, but it can be adjusted. The in-universe mechanism is psychic adjustment by one of the most powerful minds in human history. Dorn experiences the prohibition as a cognitive horizon, something he can almost see, retreating from every attempt to hold it clearly. The shape of the knowledge remains. The knowledge itself is inaccessible. The out-of-universe mechanism is simpler and stranger.
A word changed,
between printings of a short story in a 1999 anthology. No announcement. A community investigator finds the Chapter Master version years later, documents the gap, builds a video investigation around it. Subsequent Black Library authors, writing across 65 novels, maintain their own version of the posture, naming 18 legions exhaustively, while the other two remain shapes at the horizon, present enough to be felt, absent enough to be named only as numbers. The structure is the same. An entity with power over the record chooses what gets remembered and what gets made inaccessible. The thing that was almost said gets unsaid. What remains is the awareness that something is missing, without the ability to confirm exactly what was there. No GW author has publicly claimed to have designed the editorial silence to mirror the in-universe erasure. The parallel may be entirely coincidental, or it may reflect an aesthetic sense, developed across years of writing fiction about an empire that practices damnatio memoriae, that the real-world publishing decisions and the fictional ones had begun to rhyme. By the time Bly chose measured redaction bars over blank fields, or Abnett wrote Dorn noticing 2 empty plinths and reaching for a meaning he couldn't quite grasp, the fiction and the editorial policy had converged on the same shape, a maintained absence that everyone can sense but no one can fully confirm. The fans who theorize about the Lost Primarchs spend their time inside the fiction, searching for clues in Lehman Russ's cryptic implications about sanctions he'd carried out before, in Sanguinius's terror of the third empty plinth, in the Emperor's bleak expression when Corax asks about his missing brothers. They read these as breadcrumbs toward an in-universe answer, as if the truth is locked in 65 novels waiting to be assembled. Maybe it's the Subject 11 tease, the quietly retconned timeline, the measured redaction bars in Betrayal. These suggest GW continues building architecture around the blank with increasing deliberateness, not abandoning it. The community's reconstruction might prove accurate eventually. The never-to-be-revealed stance is an editorial posture communicated through author commentary and sustained omission, not a constitutional clause. It could change. But the hell-in-a-bottle question doesn't wait for that answer. It already happened. A word exists in a confirmed printing of a Black Library story that the community believes is different from the word in an earlier printing. GW has said nothing about the difference for 25 years. Romanov built a 66,000-view investigation around the gap. Codex Unknown built a 54,000-view investigation around the same gap, independently, and gave the subject a name, RUBINEK. The gap between what the community believes and what can be documented is itself the product. The realer, stranger truth is that an answer existed once in our world, in a short story in a 1999 anthology, and a company has spent 25 years not explaining what happened to the word that pointed toward it. Not the legions themselves, not the in-universe erasure. A word in a printing of a Black Library short story. That's what the trail leads back to. We spend so much time pretending the Lost Primarchs are a mystery inside the story, that the Imperium hid them, that the Emperor erased them, that the truth is locked in some sealed vault on Terra. And it's in the fiction. But the realer, stranger truth is that the closest thing to an answer in our world was in a short story in 1999. And a company has spent 25 years not explaining why that story's key word appears to have changed. Games Workshop didn't lose the Lost Primarchs. It chose them, chose the empty chairs over any sun it could have put in them, because a question that can't be answered is worth more than any answer ever could be.
The Imperium erased 2 Primarchs to protect a secret.
Games Workshop erased them to protect a mystery. And of the two erasures, the second, the real one, the publishing decision, the editorial choice, may be the one that lasts forever. Subscribe if you want more stories about what happened behind the lore.